Good morning to you all. The Gaza war and the future of the Middle East security architecture. Reality has set up our scene, so I won't make a long introduction. I will introduce our panelists and we'll go straight to the point because we have a lot of questions to answer this morning. I'm very happy to introduce Madame Ebtesam Al-Ketbi, President of Emirates Policy Center. Welcome. Mr. Ahmed Aboudouh, Associate Fellow at Chatham House and Head of China Studies at Emirates Policy Center in the UK. Welcome. Dr. Dlawer Aldeen, Founding President of the Middle East Research Institute from Iraq. Welcome. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Abdullah Al-Saud, Assistant Director General for Policy Planning at Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia. Welcome this morning. So, first of all, we see news of last couple of days. I would start with the last question of the previous session. Where were you, what do you think, where would this escalation go with Iran at the moment, Madam Abd?
Well, let me first say that this escalation from, I would say it's not from Israel, it's from Netanyahu, because the more wars, the more he is staying in power and no more election. Of course, Iran will retaliate, but it will not go to an open war because it cannot do it. With Israel, they know that, but it will go to use its proxies, the 4 proxies in the region, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. In fact, Iran tried to not escalate with Hezbollah during the Gaza war because Hezbollah for Iran is a high price for it. So it will not push Hezbollah for a war with Israel. But this time, I think it will use the whole proxies, okay? And it will make it painful for Israel. Now, it's making Israel just to frighten Israel. Give it time to be frightened, but sure, it will retaliate.
Please, the same question.
I agree with Dr. Ebtesam. I think Iran will retaliate, but I believe that its reaction will be limited. It will definitely use proxies, but there is a small chance it would use its own conventional forces. But I don't think the Iranians have any incentive whatsoever at the moment to turn this conflict into a regional conflict. And I think that's why this will be the main driver of the limited nature of their response.
Dr. Al-Aldeen?
Well, I think the answer has already been given partly. One has to understand that there has been a rule of engagement between Israel and Iran, between America and Iran for some time. And so far, neither side have actually exceeded that. So Iran actually has a lot of tools at its disposal to act against Israel. All the non-state actors we mentioned across the region are part of that. It's the first time that Israel directly hits Iranian target, and Iran considers that a hit on its territory because it defined that building as its part of its consulate. And Israel argues that none of the people killed were diplomats, they were all military guys. So the controversy will continue. Iran has to look after its own constituency, keep its street credit, so it has to retaliate, but it's actually as determined as Israel and America not to escalate beyond this tit-for-tat within the rules of engagement. So the rule of engagement will allow the two sides to negotiate behind the scene where the target should be, how big, and how to limit that. And of course, just like the incident or the killing of Qasem Soleimani in 2020, the same thing will happen. Israel will wait for a retaliatory attack, limited one, but they will watch carefully. If Iran goes beyond that, then not only Israel would be prepared to take it further, but the United States will come into the picture, and of course, a lot of other stakeholders in the region too.
Mr. Al-Saud, your comment for the beginning?
I agree with what has been said. I think, the main question would be, will Iran retaliate from its own territory using its own conventional forces or through proxies? It has tools. I tend to agree with the point of view that was just expressed, but I would caution that we live in a very dangerous and precarious time. Iran does not want to risk open confrontation and escalation that would threaten its own survival, but it has its own credibility to defend within the axis of resistance in the region. So we cannot rule out any possibility. The most likelihood scenario is that it will retaliate through proxies, but there is also the question of how much influence it has over its different proxies within the region.
You've mentioned that the time is dangerous and precarious, and we have complicated trajectory by the end of 2024, ending in the US elections, talking about security architecture and of the region and of the world. I know it's not, appropriate in these circumstances when we have this kind of escalation, this kind of loss of life, this kind of tension, first, from Hamas attack, and then on Israel's retaliation in Gaza. But what are the main pinpoints you see as we have the global problem of our common security, global architecture, and the regional situation? What is like the best and the worst case scenario that you can expect after this, what we're seeing? We can now start with Mr. Aboudouh.
I think what comes to mind now when it comes to the global level is the relationship between Gaza war and Ukraine, and in a context of great power competition. And I think these two conflicts, there is a rising evidence that these two conflicts are now connected together and intertwined in terms of the players involved. Now we are talking about the US, EU, China, Russia, and Iran in both conflicts. We are talking in terms of the structure of resolution in each of these conflicts. For example, I think the worst case scenario from a Western point of view, if a resolution in Ukraine is to be reached that does not re-establish deterrence versus Russia, and at the same time there is a failure to push the Palestinians and Israelis towards a political solution and a two-state solution, I think this will result in three main problems for the West. First, it will uncover a lot of weaknesses in the EU-US collective Western equation. Second, it will embolden China towards Taiwan and Iran towards the Gulf. And it will confirm the idea that a major military power might have its way with a smaller actor and in the end get away with it. And third, it will confirm the idea as well that nuclear deterrence is very important, because Ukraine gave away its nuclear weapons in return for some guarantee of its territorial integrity and independence. Now, it lost both if this happens, let alone the advanced stage of the Iranian nuclear program. So many countries in the Middle East, especially Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, will start to think again about the importance of nuclear deterrence and to pursue it. So in the end, these structural effects on the global structure and the global order will not be in favor of the collective West versus China especially and Russia. And which the main takeaway here, which brings me to seeing the EU and the US in a very difficult predicament that has not been seen since the Cold War towards China. And all these scenarios make China the winner gradually, slowly, but in the end, it will prevail in the competition. Unless the US and the EU are successful in turning this upside down and reach a fair resolution in both conflicts, and by that, the global South will again have faith in the feasibility of the structure of the international order, and it will start again to support it. Other than that, I think the alternative vision of China will prevail.
Mr. Al-Saud, talking about regional security and from importance of regional security, also of global security, the core issue is two-state solution. The core issue is or are guarantees to Israel of its security and of its existence. We know that Abraham Accords were on its way. You were on your way of rapprochement, and you eased your relationship with Tehran. Where do you see, the scenarios by the end of this year?
This is a very important question because this, 7th of October happened at a time when the whole region was moving towards reconciliation, reduction of tensions. And, from a Saudi point of view, the rationale behind this is the focus of our vision. It requires, the achievement of the goals require a stable region because it's not internally focused alone. It has a dimension for the whole region. Regional integration, economic regional integration is a very big component of it. That is why, the Crown Prince announced that the PIF, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi, is going to establish 5 regional companies to channel investments in Bahrain, Oman, Jordan, Iraq, and Sudan. Sudan now, unfortunately, is unstable also. Also Egypt. There was a joint Saudi-Egyptian company that was aiming to channel $24 billion of investments in the country. So this has happened at a very unfortunate time. Unfortunately, what is happening now in the region is people of the Middle East are comparing the reaction of the West in general to the situation in Ukraine and the situation in Gaza, and are seeing the huge difference between the two. Let's just remind ourselves of the key facts here. More than 33,000 individuals died in Gaza so far. More than 75,000 injured, mostly civilians, women and children. More than 75% of population in Gaza are internally displaced. The food trucks or the humanitarian trucks that enter into Gaza are well below the 500 target. 190 humanitarian personnel have died so far since the 7th of October, which makes this conflict the biggest conflicts on which UN personnel have been killed so far. And in light of all this, unfortunately, we only had one Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire 5 months after the onset of the conflict. That is unfortunate, and that really has severe repercussions beyond this conflict. I think it erodes the international rules-based order that we all have a stake in upholding. It hurts the credibility of international institutions, the multilateral frameworks that we all want to work in light of the challenges that we're all facing. And as Ahmed just mentioned, it plays in the hands of other regional powers or international powers that want to have a different world order. So what should we do? I think the main priority that we should all focus on is an immediate ceasefire, ensure that sufficient aid deliveries get into Gaza, release of all hostages immediately, and then put us on a path of credible and irreversible two-state solution. This is the only sustainable solution long-term. I fail to understand the logic or the strategic aim of what's happening right now. I think it's driven by short-term calculations on the part of the Israeli government. Because, if you kill the leaders of Hamas or destroy the organization as we know it today, killing all these civilians will create a new generation believing on violence as the only solution. And one thing is very important to remember, the moderates of the region, in Palestine and in the region as a whole, they were weakened because they were not allowed to deliver on the promises that they have promised to their own people, especially in the Palestinian issue. In 1982, Saudi Arabia came up with the Arab Peace Plan in Fas, in the Arab League Summit. 2 decades later, in 2002, the Arab Peace Initiative was endorsed not only by the Arabs, by the OIC as well and all Muslim countries. In 1993, the PLO recognized Israel. Where is the recognition of Israel of Palestine? Where is the Israeli peace plan? So we really need to move beyond this towards a sustainable solution, and the only way that's going to happen is a two-state solution. The key here is a credible and irreversible process. What that means is the question that we need all to figure out.
Madam Al-Ketbi, how would you connect the actual situation with future regional security and global security, considering what we heard? You have something to add to this?
As Mr. Abdullah said before, we were in a situation where, before Gaza war, de-escalation in the region, defreezing the conflicts, because all the players came to a conclusion that their goals is not feasible, so time for rapprochement. And that's when we had UAE-Iran rapprochement, Saudi-Iran, and GCC also rapprochement. But also Gaza war came as a game changer and turned this whole upside down. I have to say about what is the solution of Gaza war. Right now, both parties are in a deadlock when I'm saying that. Netanyahu, on one hand, he knows that stopping the war, it means he will go to jail. So he will not stop the war, has no intention to stop the war. On the other hand, Hamas leaders also, they know if they stop the war, there is no guarantee that Israel are not going to target them and kill them. So that's why both sides raising the bar of their conditions they are putting in the negotiation. And this doesn't, plus, of course, you have that competition on the global level between China and Russia on one hand and United States on one hand, which is also has an impact on what's going on the region. So there won't be any stability because that competition, mainly China, US, always has an impact on our region. So you always will have these kind of conflicts going on. Security structure, if you are talking about the Gulf, there are many initiatives, but I will mean that Hermes initiative, which Rouhani he presented, which is also seeing Iran, seeing itself, it is the center, it is the hegemon. So this is also, the Iranian is not accepting that they can be, or they can be equal between all the Gulfs. And this is, we cannot reach. There is also, with this rapprochement also, we have it, I would say, frankly, I will talk, that rapprochement, it's not because we came to a conclusion that Iran, a state who can respect international law. No, we came to a conclusion that you cannot fight Iran because it has many arms, which is proxies, which is arsenal of arms, drones, ballistic missiles, nuclear capabilities, and the West, mainly US, failed us. When the Iranian strike against Saudi after killing Soleimani, the Iranian, they didn't went to strike against US, they strike against Saudi, against us, against our tankers. So your ally cannot be credible. So this rapprochement also, because your ally is not, when Houthi hit us, where is US after 1 month? They are coming. So I don't think we will reach that kind of architecture because there is imbalance in the region. There is one power having everything, and instead of stopping that powers, US and Europe, they went after Iran, begging it to sit on the table and, okay, you remember Vienna, and you remember before that. I remember the deal of 2015 without even consulting with the Gulfis, has been done behind their back. And that means that show you that also, no matter these global powers, I mean, even the Chinese, it's not because of they want that rapprochement for their interests. It's not because they want a stable region. So interests here is matter. And United States, when did they reach after, as Prince Abdullah said, after 5 months? Because also, US hasn't got an interest to stop this war from the beginning. They were opposing in the Security Council towards any ceasefire. Until the end, when Netanyahu was not listening to Biden, and after rejecting also the Chinese, first one or the Russian, then they became agreed. But now you cannot stop the war because there is no interest on both sides to stop the war. And the Iranian, of course, after this latest incident against them, from the beginning they felt they are loser because the Saudi went to talk to Israeli, okay? And they've been also excluded from the IMEC. So from beginning, they felt they are losers, so they have to retaliate through their proxies.
Dr. Aldeen?
Right, well, let me just make certain points clear because the topic is complex. First of all, the security architecture in the Middle East, in our region, has been shaping up for some years. And it was on its way to crystallize in the form of alliances between the Gulf, Israel, and many nations that are allied to that, versus Iran, what they call them proxies or vassal states or allies, because they do have state and non-state actors in the region. So this architecture was evolving, fast evolving, and it went deep enough for Gaza war to dismantle it. The Gaza war did not dismantle it. Fine-tunes it. It's a new page. It made people think again how to prevent this architecture from crumbling. But at the end of the day, the evolution of this relationship or alignment between those countries versus Iran is still shaping up. After the Gaza war, it will come back on its path to completion and maturity. And if you go back one step, what led to this new alignment, new change in this dynamic was all about the United States disengaging and leaving these countries vulnerable, while regional powers such as Iran and Turkey were emerging as major dominant powers in the region, dictating the terms and the rule of the game. Iran, obviously with Iran, neither of them, neither Iran nor Israel nor Turkey are not interested in stabilizing. They are more at rivalry at each other's throats to secure as much influence as fast as they can. When it comes to the overall architecture, you cannot dissociate between the global one, the regional one, and then national or subnational ones. So Gaza war is part of that. It didn't happen on its own. So we can see that the globe, the whole world is lost between this bipolarity, multipolarity, unipolarity, and it's not settled yet. And then when you leave the Middle East to its own accord, then regional powers take matters into their hand. Again, they are not settled. They're fast working at reaching an equilibrium at some point where there's some kind of logic, whether it's economic, trade, stability, coexistence. These things have not yet happened, but we're in the middle of it. And then subnationally, so many countries are fragile, failed, or struggling to keep their survival sorted, and there are others that are emerging strong. And of course, there are sub-state actors also driving the agenda, dictating terms, and helping this evolution. And obviously, Hamas is one of them. There are many other sub-state actors, Houthis and others. And they all are transnational. They all have alliances with regional and global powers. And there is no power in the region that is not actually engaging proxies across the border. They all do. But Iran is very good at it. Iran has mastered it. What is missing in the whole thing, from the global level all the way down to national, subnational level, there's something big missing, and that's leadership. The moment that under the Obama administration, the United States decided to disengage, not just from Iraq, but from the whole region, then we entered this race about everybody trying to secure their niche and their national security. And of course, not everybody emerged strong and successful, but there are, obviously, there are good examples in the Gulf as well as elsewhere. So now, in the absence of a genuine leadership, you mentioned EU. EU is in no position to provide that leadership. EU is actually at the moment irrelevant as, in the same way as UN, except for the humanitarian aspects of it, where they provide support, provide reason, provide advice, but actually in shifting the balance and making a difference and making people stop, neither EU nor UN are actually, in this case, relevant. Maybe European member states, but not EU, because EU doesn't have the teeth as such. So now back to Gaza, the Hamas itself, what it started this, it had its own calculations, but very soon found itself completely isolated. Not a single Arab country is supporting Hamas, nor they want refugees from Palestine. And they all have tolerated what Israel has done. But nobody thought it will take this long and this many casualties. But look, no Arab country has moved. They all are still watching Iran. They've all gone back beyond the populism and beyond the rhetoric. They've gone back to their normal comfort zones. So Israel is now dictating the agenda. Israel is unstoppable. And the ultimate objective they set out is to get rid of Hamas as a governing body, not necessarily annihilate it, but completely remove it from governing a couple of million people, and then think about the next administration, next governing system, or whoever is in charge. So while this is happening, what is happening to the architecture? The architecture is the same. The Iranians are quite happy to see that their weakest link, which was Hamas, in the proxy war, is actually giving Israel such a hard time, and made Israel vulnerable, made it exposed, made it actually completely undermine the myth of Israel being invincible. So that's what Hamas did. But Iran is like an onion, has got other layers. They are using the Houthis at some point. And then they use, if necessary, Hezbollah. And then the Iraqi proxies. And then themselves. But Iran is determined, obviously, to keep the wars, to keep the fires as far away from its border as possible, and it has done so far. So the bottom line, in terms of the security architecture, I think it's safe, I think it's evolving, and I think it still lacks leadership, and I think it still waits for somebody at a global level to come and say, this is now detrimental to all our collective interest, and then at the end, all wars end at the table. And this is where Iran wants to have a seat at the table, Turkey wants to have a seat at the table, Israel and the Gulf Arabs all want to have a seat at the table. This is what is coming. So if your question was actually where it's going, I think it will always end up at the negotiating table, but we are nowhere near ready to do that until Israel believes that it has achieved its objective.
Talking about this, you've mentioned two important things for any kind of architectures. This is leadership and negotiating. We've mentioned at the beginning November elections in the US. You all mentioned US and their absence in the region, or their change of hearts in the region, or differences between former Trump administration, current Biden administration, and basically uncertainty what will happen in the US itself. So what can we expect knowing what Trump did in the region, or if this administration continues? Maybe we can start with you.
I'm always saying, US creating problem when they step in and then when they step out. Always in the region.
And maybe do you agree with Doctor that EU is basically irrelevant, and UN as such, we know how many calls we had for the change of the concept of multilateralism now, multipolar world. So can we come out of any solution out of this?
I think the US is resisting that it is multipolar. The Chinese trying to make it multipolar, and that competition it's going on and going on, and also it's reflecting itself on our region. But back to your question, we had Trump the first administration, I remember I was in Valdai. That was 2000, when Trump has been elected, and that Valdai Club conference, and Putin was there, and there was one question from the audience asking him, Mr. Putin, what do you think that American choose Trump? And that guy, he was just like laughing when he was saying. And Putin was a joker face. He said, well, this is what the American chose, and we should respect the democracy, the American democracy. But I will just look at it from our angle, I mean, regional angle, mainly the Gulfists, or even the Arabs. They go along more with the Republican rather than the Democrats, okay? It's always like that. It's not because they are conservative. I don't know. They think that the Republican, they understand them better. I mean, the issue of human rights and that parameters they are putting to deal with them. And it was obvious with Obama's administration and with the involvement of US in the Arab Spring. And that started from there, that gap between both. I don't think Trump, he looked to the region that, especially to the Gulf, this is where a treasury, he can get money. He's not a politician. He's a guy, a dealer for business. He looks to deals to get from the region. But they go along with him better than Biden administration. I mean, he will not call them parade. He will not criticize them for many things. And he will not make a deal with Iran behind their back. So, but for America, of course, they look at this as a disaster if Trump is coming again. But he might go also to have a deal with the Chinese and to have a deal with the Russian, and maybe this is also, it will make our world less conflicts and less war than what we are having now. But of course it will affect Ukraine because he's not going to send arms to Ukraine. This guy, he needs money for everything he will do. And he will not involve in more wars in the region. He is the guy who asked that the troops should get out of the region.
But he also was opposing two-state solution. As remember, I will give a question to...
But he doesn't go along also with Netanyahu. He doesn't go... I mean, he wants to get out of the region. He doesn't want that the American... And what he said, nothing for free. If you want us to protect you, you have to pay. In fact, we are paying even before Trump, and this protection is not free.
So the question to Mr. Saud, talking about money and change of policy in Washington, or coming back to previous policy, as we know your relationship with the US and already mentioned Abraham Accords, what do you think can happen with scenarios in the US and the region?
I think our relationship with the United States is strategic and important. And it's very institutional, you know, regardless of what administration is in the White House. We have worked with the Republicans. We are working now with the Democrats. I don't want to comment on who's going to win the elections. You know, the bottom line here is that the United States is the country with the most leverage over Israel. And it is the country that is, you know, that can exercise more influence to change the dynamics of the conflict specifically and the regional situation as a whole. We are living in a very transitional time globally, you know, with this change, you know, the whole system, global order is in flux, and with it comes uncertainty. We're not in the unipolar world after the Cold War. We are probably moving towards asymmetrical multipolarity. And that has implications in the Middle East and in Africa, in Latin America, in East Asia, everywhere. I think there has been a shift in the opinion of the international community regarding the situation in Israel, but we need to move beyond supportive statements towards tangible commitments. And I'm afraid without accountability, without some form of accountability, there will not be enough pressure on Israel to de-escalate the situation.
Or for you to continue, sorry to interrupt, the negotiations, for you to continue rapprochement with Israel without that.
We're not in negotiations with Israel. We're in negotiations with the United States. Peace is our strategic option. We talked about leadership. We are fortunate in the kingdom that we have courageous leadership that is determined to do the right thing, even at some political cost, if it thinks and is convinced that this is the right thing to do. And regional integration, de-escalation is a very strategic option. The question is at what cost? Even before 7th of October, we were very clear with our American friends that there needs to be very clear commitments towards a Palestinian state. This is still the case. Now, it's very difficult in the current climate with the escalations going on to talk about, to even see this happening. But this remains the position of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and we have conveyed this both publicly and privately. We need a credible and irreversible path towards a Palestinian state in order to have any sort of normalization or regional integration going forward.
Mr. Aboudouh, you've mentioned already China. We didn't mention that much Russia. Russia's role in the region, and talking about regional security architecture, we have to also expand maybe to your neighborhood from the other side in Africa, north of Africa and Sahel, talking about the whole security architecture of this part of the world. How do you see Russia's role at the moment concerning its role in Ukraine, but of course with the Middle East and Gaza war?
I think, first of all, we have to get some facts straight. Russia and China don't see the Middle East as a strategic priority, right? But they see it as a venue for strategic competition. Although they have similar objectives in terms of having a place at the table, undermining the US, aligning with the global South, they have some differences, and some differences in terms of objectives and concerns. For example, Russia is very concerned about radicalization and terrorism, and we saw the price, the heavy price that Russia recently paid. China doesn't see that as an imminent threat, so they differ in that. They also differ on the priority of regional stability. While China really have huge emphasis on its commercial and political interests in the region and really wants to stop the war in Gaza because they have huge concern on this transforming into a regional conflict, Russia, on the other hand, would be very satisfied to see a whole change in the security structure in the region, while China wants just to reform it. So both have some differences, but I think the main problem that the region is facing at the global level is the transition that we are going through. And this transition will be accelerated if Trump came to power, for sure, especially when it comes to Russia. Because in this scenario, I always like to say China would love Trump to come back to power. Because in this scenario, we will see less emphasis on Ukraine and maybe a settlement that is not in the favor of the European Union and Ukraine, and lifting of some sanctions. Second, we will see a rupture between the EU and America, which would eventually push the EU to balance the Trump administration by going closer to China, which is inconceivable now, but it can happen. And also we will see less American emphasis on Taiwan. On the economic level, we will see protectionism rising again. And in the age of de-risking, that's a huge chance for China to push its interests, and Russia as well. What is the implication? The great competition in the Middle East. We will see China and Russia, if this happens, going closer to the Gulf states, which are the leader now in the Middle East, doing more business with them. But more importantly, we will see the Middle Eastern countries believing in what China and Russia are offering in terms of norms, principles, and pillars of the international system and values, because of the isolationist approach of Trump and because of the self-interest inherently coloring the foreign policy of the Trump administration. We will also see compatibility between the economic transition in the Gulf and that of China and Russia, because they have a lot of similarities in the sectors they are interested in the future, while America will not provide this because of the isolationist approach. And we will see the worst deal that any great power would like to have in a strategic region like the Middle East, which is more security burdens. As Prince Abdullah said, America will always be the principal security partner, but less influence and more agency for regional powers. And this will play in the hands of China and Russia in the long term. So the top line, the bottom line of this is that the transition in the Middle East will have three scenarios, because I agree with Dr. Dlawer about the transition we're going through, but at what cost? And this we need to expand on. First, we will have a conflict, and this can happen if Iran calculates that it is time to strike Israel and to lit the whole region ablaze, or Israel calculating that it needs to carry out a preemptive strike against Iran, or push it away from its borders and destroy Hezbollah, for example. Or we will have business as usual, and this actually colors the United States' position since decoupling from the region towards the Indo-Pacific. Business as usual, as if nothing happened on October 7. We will try to pursue the regional integration. We will try to push forward the normalization with Israel as if nothing happened. And then after 5-6 years, we will have the same cycle of violence, which is not in the interest of the West. Or the third one, which is peace. The US and the EU really apply heavy pressure on Israel to sit down at the table with the Palestinians and to reach or to start a process towards a two-state solution. And this is the only scenario that the US and the EU can save their influence in the region and can stand up to China and Russia at the global level, not worrying about the Middle East and its importance, and it's, for the EU, its backyard, and really can focus on their strategic objectives towards Russia in Eastern Europe or China in the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you so much. Fantastic analysis. As we approach last 10 minutes, I would make a challenge to all of you, but Prince Al Saud, I will ask you a special question for the end, because you're basically in the government, you're all in other position here, so maybe you can indulge me. I give you the mandate, Dr. Dlawer, you are in charge of solving the situation. You have all the means in your hand that you can have to deal with the current situation and to propose us all steps forward. What would you do? Yes, if you are the main person responsible for...
Talking about the Middle East?
Yes, of course.
This
is our subject.
Thank God I'm not in charge. First of all, we have to accept that we're in the peak of this new dynamic. We are not in anywhere near sorted or settled. Solution is not around the corner, because all the drivers of conflict, all the drivers of this turmoil, as well as drive towards a new architecture, are still at it. They are still very fast. And most of the actors are still trying to find their way into a zone where they can actually predict the future or agree solutions. I did talk about leadership, and we're not going to expect that from any of the countries in the region, but each one is trying to lead their own country into what they can, because every one of them tried and tested different models of intervention across the neighbors. Look at Yemen, how Emirates, Saudis, others, they tested that, they took a seat back. Now they're quite happy to leave it to United States, United Kingdom, and others to say, you sort it out for us. I come back to the big three, that is US, China, and Russia, and possibly EU member states, but not EU. In the reverse order, first of all, people talked about Russia. For us in the Middle East, Russia is not as important. Russia's relationship with all our nations are actually transactional. They come in, you want them to do something, you pay for it, they do it. Except for Syria, where they had their base. And that is too strategic for them to leave it. But even then, when they had Ukraine war, they actually took a hands-off approach. They left more to the Iranians, where they previously did not. So they do have problems with Iran and Syria. But Russia is not really that much predator or focused on occupying niches that the United States might leave behind. China is most opportunistic in this case, allows the United States to do the work, to do all the security, to do all the anything needed to secure business in the area, and then they come in with the economic power, with their road built on road, or they come in with lending money to build and stuff like that. So at the end, they were not mostly affected by the tragedies, and they were beneficiaries, except that what the Houthis are doing in the Red Sea is going to eventually affect their trade and make prices higher and affect their economy. So they may come back and re-agree or align themselves with the West on this issue. So really, China is not in any way intervening as a superpower with the military interventions and trying to shape events. They watch, they abide by international law, and they strike good relationship with anybody who's prepared to do business with them. But that brings us back to the United States. The United States, there is no alternative to the United States. There is no other alternative in the foreseeable future. But the problem we have is that the United States is not reliable anymore. They disengage, their priority is elsewhere. The Middle East is no longer a priority. We in Iraq, we used to be the top priority. We are no longer even at the bottom of priorities of the United States. The United States administration, they'd love to engage, they'd love to be seen to be serious. They try to convince you that the Middle East is so important, but actually in reality, their priority was not Middle East until Gaza war brought them back. Before that, they were quite happy to encourage the Saudis, the Emirates, others to sort it out, negotiate with Iran, go to China, do something with their backing while they have their military bases in the entire region. So in many ways, when people saw Afghanistan, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, that Aramco attack where the United States, just before that, had milked the Saudis with almost $500 billion, almost $1 trillion, yet they left Saudis exposed, as well as the Emiratis. And of course, now we see the way they support Israel. So that meant the Middle East people are hoping for a better focus from the United States. They do not have an alternative to the United States, but the United States refuses to lead or in the Middle East or give Middle East the priority. This brings you back to Europe. European member states, it's in their interest to come and provide some sort of vision, leadership, intervention, because at the end of the day, when we have turmoil, who's going to pay the biggest price? Migration is always towards Europe, next door neighbor. Terrorism always next towards Europe. And loss of trade. Who lost more trade than Europe compared to the United States and others? So it is time for the Europeans to look closely at the Middle East and say, let's do something about bringing all actors together and be realistic. Going back to Gulf War, pre-Arab Spring or multipolarity is no longer possible. People have moved on, the world moved on. But there is a way that all actors need to get together and somebody somewhere convinces the United States that Middle East is going to give you problems forever if you do not come back and give it priority.
But waiting for that to come back, to happen, I'm going back to Prince Al Saud for the end. You've mentioned your will and responsibility to position yourself as a regional leader, and concerning your overall role at the moment and your rapprochement with Tehran, what can you do as Saudis at this moment?
I think since the outbreak of the conflict, following the Arab and Islamic summit that took place, one of the outcomes was a ministerial delegation headed by Saudi Arabia and comprised Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, Indonesia, and other countries. And they made more than, I think, 30 trips to Western and Eastern capitals. And I think part of the shift in the opinion of the international community is credited to that. Now, what can we do more? I think, as just mentioned by all my co-panelists, there needs to be mounting diplomatic pressure on the part of the United States, which is the most important country here, but also individual European states, China and others. The position of European countries is not similar. We have Spain, we have Ireland, who have very positive positions, but we need to, the problem here is that you have one very powerful side and one very weak side. So the most powerful, which is Israel, has no incentive to give the weak anything. And the weak side can't really extract any concessions from the powerful side. So we need to level the playing field. How can we do that? There's a question that's going to come up soon of admitting Palestine as a full member in the United Nations. Now is the time for individual countries to make their positions clear and be on the right side of history. This is something that's been long overdue. And also, one thing that worries me, that's, we hear statements from some of the Israeli officials of an invasion of Rafah coming soon. If that happens, you can imagine there is 1.5 million individuals there. What do you think is going to happen? There are going to be forceful displacement. There are going to be refugees going to, probably even destabilizing Jordan and Egypt even more. And we shouldn't be complacent of the ability of regional countries putting a lid on the public anger. And that's going to really create a regional turmoil even more than is happening now. And one last point. The issue of radicalization was tackled in the previous panel. And this is, before I joined the government, I was an academic, and this was my area of expertise. The conflict between Israel and Palestine was really a slogan that all radical groups and terrorist groups used for decades. And now it's happening in reality. So I'm afraid a new wave of radicalization is something that we all ought to look out for, not just in the Middle East, but all across the world, even here in Europe. And I'm not also just worried about radicalization on the side of the Middle East or Muslim radicalization. I'm worried about radicalization and shift to the right in Israeli society itself. And we have seen how the settlers have attacked the West Bank. So, it's a very grim picture. I'm hopeful that, mounting diplomatic pressure is going to change the dynamics of the situation. And as a diplomat, I have to always be hopeful and optimistic.
Thank you so much. The morning will continue with the session on the future of Middle East with my dear friends Henry Barkey and Soli Ozel, because this is of huge importance for us all. So we're like in the phases this morning. So thank you so much, Madam Ebtesam Al-Ketbi, Ahmed Aboudouh, Dlawer Aldeen, and Abdullah Saud for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.